The manila envelope fell from David's briefcase like a confession, papers scattering across the hardwood floor of their bedroom with the whisper that seemed to echo through the entire house. Sarah Chen Martinez knelt slowly, her silk pajamas pooling around her knees as she gathered the documents with trembling fingers. The letterhead read, Family Court of Kings County, in bold, official font, and beneath it, words that made her world tilt sideways. Petition for adoption. The baby's name was Isabella Rose Thompson, born 3 weeks ago. Father, David Martinez. Mother, Melissa Thompson. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, a sound like glass breaking in slow motion. She sat back on her heels, the adoption papers clutched against her chest, feeling the rapid hammering of her heart against the legal documents that were about to destroy everything she thought she knew about her life. Downstairs, she could hear David moving around the kitchen, the familiar sounds of their morning routine, the coffee maker gurgling to life, the refrigerator door opening and closing, the clink of his favorite ceramic mug against the marble countertop. These were the sounds of normalcy, of a marriage she had believed in for 7 years, of a partnership she had trusted completely until this moment. The bedroom still smelled like their shared sleep, like David's cologne mixed with her lavender body lotion, like the vanilla candle she had lit last night when they made love. The memory felt obscene now, tainted by the knowledge that while she had been whispering, "I love you," into his ear, he had been planning to adopt another woman's baby, his baby, without telling her. Sarah stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked to their bedroom window. The October morning was crisp and golden, the maple tree in their front yard dressed in brilliant orange and red. Mrs. Chen from next door was walking her small terrier, stopping to let him investigate the fire hydrant. Everything looked exactly as it had yesterday, as it had every morning for the 3 years they had lived in this house. But Sarah felt like she was viewing it all through different eyes now, eyes that had been forced open in the cruelest possible way. She thought of her sister Jenny, who had warned her about marrying David so quickly. "You've only known him 18 months, she had said, her voice gentle but concerned. "Are you sure you know him well enough?" Sarah had been so certain then, so confident in the connection she felt with David, in the way he made her laugh, in the dreams they shared about children and growing old together. Children. The word felt like a knife now. They had been trying for 2 years, Sarah tracking her cycles with desperate precision, taking vitamins, scheduling romantic weekends around ovulation dates. The fertility specialist had been cautiously optimistic. "Sometimes it just takes time," Dr. Rahman had said just last month. "Your tests look good. David's tests look good. Try not to stress." Sarah had clung to those words, had repeated them to herself during the dark moments when doubt crept in. She had imagined their child's first steps, first words, the Christmas mornings they would share. She had never imagined that while she was hoping and planning and praying, David was already someone else's father. The adoption papers were dated 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. Sarah tried to remember what David had been doing 2 weeks ago, searched her memory for signs she might have missed. He had been working late more often, taking calls outside, claiming it was a difficult client. He had seemed distracted during dinner, checking his phone repeatedly. When she had asked about it, he kissed her forehead and said, "Just work stuff, baby. Nothing for you to worry about." Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the window, her dark hair tangled from sleep, her brown eyes wide with shock and pain. At 32, she had thought she had figured out who she was, a successful marketing director, a loving wife, a woman building toward a future filled with the children she desperately wanted. Now, she felt like a stranger to herself, like someone who had been sleepwalking through her own life. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made her freeze. David was coming up, probably to shower and get ready for work, to continue the charade of their normal life. Sarah looked down at the papers in her hands, at Isabella Rose Thompson's birth certificate listing David as the father, at the custody agreement that would give him legal rights to raise this child. "Sarah?" David's voice called from the hallway. "You okay up there? You're usually downstairs by now." Sarah opened her mouth to respond but found no words. How do you answer that question when your entire world has just been revealed as a lie? How do you pretend everything is fine when you're holding proof of your husband's betrayal? "Sarah?" David's voice was closer now, right outside their bedroom door. She turned away from the window, clutching the papers tighter, and watched as the door opened and her husband of 7 years walked into their bedroom. He looked exactly as he had yesterday. 6 feet tall, dark hair still messy from sleep, brown eyes warm with what she had always thought was love. He was wearing the blue pajama pants she had bought him for his birthday, and he was smiling at her with the same smile that had made her fall in love with him 8 years ago. "Morning, beautiful," he said, moving toward her with the easy confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe. "You're up early." Sarah held up the adoption papers, watching as David's face changed, as the smile faded and his eyes widened with something that looked like panic. "I need you to explain this," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. "I need you to explain why you're adopting Melissa Thompson's baby without telling your wife." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He reached for the papers, but Sarah stepped back, holding them out of his reach. "Sarah, wait," he said, his voice taking on the pleading tone she recognized from the rare times he had disappointed her in small ways, forgetting anniversaries, coming home late from work events. But this wasn't small, this was everything. "I misunderstood," Sarah's voice rose, 8 years of trust cracking like ice. "I misunderstood adoption papers with your name on them. I misunderstood a birth certificate that says you're the father." "It's not what you think," David said, taking a step closer. "Let me explain." But Sarah was already moving past him, toward their closet, toward the suitcase she kept on the top shelf for their weekend trips to her parents' house in Vermont, for their anniversary vacations to places where they dreamed aloud about their future children. "Where are you going?" David asked. His voice, tight with what she now recognized, wasn't concern for her feelings, but fear of losing control of his carefully constructed deception. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Because the truth was, she had no idea where she was going. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in this house, in this bedroom, in this marriage for one more second, while everything she thought she knew about her life revealed itself to be built on lies. The adoption papers felt heavy in her hands, weighted with secrets and betrayal, as she reached for her suitcase and began to plan her escape from the only life she had ever wanted. Sarah pulled the suitcase down from the shelf with more force than necessary, sending several shoeboxes tumbling to the floor. The crash echoed through their bedroom like an exclamation point, and she saw David flinch in her peripheral vision. Good. Let him be uncomfortable. Let him feel even a fraction of the chaos she was experiencing. "Sarah, please," David said, moving closer. "Just sit down and let me explain. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" The word came out as a laugh, but there was no humor in it, only the sound of something precious breaking apart. "My husband has been living a double life, has fathered a child with another woman, and is adopting that child without telling me, and I'm overreacting?" She began pulling clothes from their shared dresser, not caring what she grabbed, just needing to move, to do something with her hands that wasn't hitting David or screaming or falling apart completely. Her favorite sweater, the one David had bought her in Ireland on their honeymoon, a pair of jeans, underwear, the silk scarf her mother had given her for luck on her wedding day. Each item felt like a memory being packed away, a piece of the life she thought she had been building. The burgundy dress she had worn to David's company Christmas party last year, where she had spent the evening chatting with his colleagues' wives about fertility treatments and adoption agencies. The irony wasn't lost on her now. She had been researching adoption as a backup plan, while David was apparently already pursuing it as his primary option, just not with her. "The timeline doesn't add up, David," she said, folding clothes with mechanical precision. "When did this relationship start? When did you meet this Melissa person? Because according to this birth certificate, you two created a baby around the time we were celebrating our 6th anniversary." David sat heavily on their bed, running his hands through his hair in a gesture she had always found endearing. Now it just looked like what it probably was, a calculated attempt to appear vulnerable and confused, rather than caught in a massive deception. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said quietly. "Melissa and we work together. She's in the accounting department. It was just supposed to be one time, Sarah. One mistake. I was drunk after the office party in January, and you had been so sad about the fertility treatments not working, and I was stressed, and—" "Stop." Sarah's voice cut through his explanation like a blade. "Stop making this about me. Stop making this about my sadness or your stress or anything other than what it actually is. You cheating on your wife and then lying about it for months." She turned to face him fully, the adoption papers still clutched in one hand, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not the charming man who brought her coffee in bed on Saturday mornings, not the partner who held her hand during doctor's appointments, not the husband who whispered promises about their future children into her ear at night. She saw a stranger who happened to share her last name and her bed. "Is this the first time?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. David's hesitation told her everything she needed to know before he even spoke. "Sarah, is this the first time?" she repeated, her voice deadly quiet. "No," he whispered, and the word hit her like a physical blow. Sarah sank into the chair by their bedroom window, the same chair where she had sat countless mornings planning their days, their weekends, their future. The leather felt cold against her skin, and she realized she was still in her pajamas, still looking like the trusting wife who had woken up 20 minutes ago in what she thought was her happy marriage. "How many times?" she asked. "Sarah, please don't do this to yourself. How many times, David?" "It doesn't matter."
"It matters to me." The words exploded out of her, 8 years of suppressed doubts and ignored red flags finally finding their voice. "It matters to me because I've been sitting in fertility clinics feeling broken and inadequate while you've been sleeping with other women. It matters to me because I've been planning a future with someone who apparently doesn't exist." David stood up abruptly, pacing to the other side of the room. "You want to know the truth? Fine. Melissa wasn't the first. There was Rebecca from the gym 2 years ago, and Caroline from that conference in Chicago, and maybe a few others. I don't keep a list, Sarah." Each name felt like a separate betrayal, a different lie she had unknowingly been living. Sarah thought of the conference in Chicago, how excited David had been when he came home, how passionate he had seemed when they made love that night. She had thought his energy came from missing her, from being glad to be home. Now she understood it had been guilt, or worse, comparison. "Why?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she really wanted to know. "Why did you marry me if this is who you are?" David stopped pacing and looked at her, and for a moment she saw something that might have been genuine remorse in his eyes. "Because I love you. I do love you, Sarah. I know that sounds impossible to believe right now, but it's true. You're my home. You're my safe place. Those other women, they don't mean anything." "They mean everything," Sarah said, standing up and walking back to her suitcase. "They mean that every day for years you've been lying to me. Every time you came home and kissed me and asked about my day and told me you loved me, you were lying. Every time we made love, every time we talked about having children together, every time you held my hand in the doctor's office, all lies." She zipped the suitcase closed, the sound final and decisive. "And now you're going to be a father. Just not with me." "The baby," David started. Don't, Sarah said, holding up her hand. Don't you dare try to explain away this child. Isabella Rose Thompson is your daughter. She's real, she exists, and she's going to grow up knowing that her father chose to bring her into this world while lying to his wife about her very existence. Sarah picked up her purse from the dresser, checking for her wallet, her keys, her phone. The mundane tasks of leaving felt surreal, like she was watching someone else pack up the remnants of a marriage. "Where will you go?" David asked, and she heard something that might have been actual concern in his voice. "I don't know," Sarah said honestly, "but I can't be here. I can't sleep in this bed and wake up in this house and pretend that we can work through this. Some things can't be fixed, David. Some betrayals are too big." She walked toward their bedroom door, then stopped and turned back to him. "I hope you're a better father to her than you were a husband to me, because she deserves better than this. Every child deserves better than this." And with that, Sarah Chen Martinez walked out of the bedroom she had shared with her husband, down the stairs past the kitchen where their coffee was still brewing, and out the front door of the only home she had known as a married woman, carrying nothing but a suitcase, her broken heart, and the adoption papers that had revealed the truth about the man she had pledged to love forever. Sarah's Honda Civic felt like a time capsule as she sat in the parking lot of the Marriott downtown, the engine running but going nowhere, just like her life. The adoption papers spread across the passenger seat next to her purse and phone, which had been buzzing relentlessly with calls from David. She had stopped answering after the 15th attempt, when his messages had shifted from frantic apologies to angry demands that she come home and stop being dramatic. Dramatic. As if discovering your husband's double life was some kind of performance art. The hotel lobby was neutral and impersonal, exactly what Sarah needed. She checked in under her maiden name, Sarah Chen, an identity she hadn't used in 7 years. The desk clerk, a young woman with kind eyes and a professional smile, handed her the keycard without judgment, though Sarah wondered if her appearance gave away the catastrophe of her morning. She had thrown on jeans and a sweater in the hotel parking lot, using her side mirrors to attempt some kind of normalcy, but she suspected she still looked like what she was, a woman whose world had imploded before breakfast. Room 412 was small and clean and anonymous. Sarah set her suitcase on the bed and immediately felt the weight of displacement settle over her, like a heavy blanket. This wasn't home. This wasn't even close to home. This was limbo, a holding pattern while she figured out what came next. She had been Sarah Chen Martinez for 7 years. Before that, she had been Sarah Chen, marketing coordinator at a small firm in Boston, living in a studio apartment with a view of a brick wall, eating cereal for dinner and dreaming of a life that looked nothing like the one she was living. David had changed all of that. David had been her transformation, her upgrade, her evolution from symbol woman to wife, from individual to half of a partnership she had believed was unshakable. Now she was back to being Sarah Chen, but she wasn't 25 anymore, wasn't the eager young professional with endless possibilities stretching ahead of her. She was 32, established in a career she had built around the stability of her marriage, living in a city where all her friends were couple friends, where her identity had become so intertwined with David's that she wasn't sure who she was without him. Sarah opened her laptop and stared at the blank screen, muscle memory making her check her work email first. 37 new messages, most of them routine client communications, a few marked urgent. Her assistant, Marcus, had sent a concerned note asking if she was feeling all right, since she hadn't arrived for her 9 a.m. meeting with the Reynolds account. She looked at the time, 11:43 a.m. In her old life, the life that had ended 3 hours ago, missing a meeting would have been unthinkable. Now it seemed like the least important thing in the world. She typed out a brief message to Marcus. "Family emergency. Will be out today. Please reschedule all appointments." Then she closed the laptop before she could second-guess herself.
The hotel room was too quiet, so Sarah turned on the television, flipping through channels without really seeing anything. A cooking show where a cheerful chef was making a romantic dinner for two. A talk show where the hosts were discussing red flags in relationships with the kind of casual expertise that comes from never having lived through real betrayal. A movie where a woman was walking down the aisle in a white dress, her face glowing with the kind of happiness Sarah remembered feeling on her own wedding day. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Jenny. How did the doctor's appointment go this morning? Any news? The doctor's appointment. Sarah had completely forgotten. She was supposed to have seen Dr. Rahman this morning for her monthly check-in, another step in their fertility journey, another attempt to understand why her body wouldn't cooperate with her dreams of motherhood. The irony was devastating. While she had been preparing for another conversation about why she couldn't get pregnant, David had been secretly navigating the legal process of claiming a child he had fathered with another woman. Sarah stared at Jenny's text for a long time before typing back, "Canceled it. Long story. We'll call later." But she knew she wouldn't call later. How do you explain to your sister that your marriage was a lie? That your husband was not only cheating, but had fathered a child with one of his affair partners? How do you admit that everyone who had ever expressed concern about your relationship had been right, and you had been the naive fool who believed in fairy tales?
Jenny had never liked David. Not openly, she was too kind for that, but Sarah had seen it in the way her sister's smile became forced around him, in the way she changed the subject when Sarah gushed about her marriage, in the way she had pulled Sarah aside at family gatherings to ask if she was really happy. Sarah had been defensive then, protective of her relationship, certain that Jenny just didn't understand the depth of connection she shared with David. "You don't see him the way I do," Sarah had said more than once. "You don't see how he takes care of me, how he makes me laugh, how he talks about our future." Jenny had always just nodded and said something diplomatic about hoping Sarah was right. Sarah had thought her sister was being unsupportive. Now she realized Jenny had been being careful, walking the line between expressing concern and maintaining their relationship. Sarah's mother had been more direct. "He's charming," she had said after meeting David for the first time, "but charm and character aren't the same thing, honey." Sarah had dismissed the comment as her mother being overprotective, as a widow projecting her fears onto her daughter's relationship. Margaret Chen had lost her husband in a car accident when Sarah was 16, and Sarah had always assumed her mother's skepticism about marriage came from that trauma, from the understanding that even good marriages could end in devastation. Now Sarah wondered if her mother had seen something she had missed, some fundamental flaw in David's character that had been invisible to Sarah's love-blinded eyes. The hotel room's mirror reflected a woman Sarah barely recognized. Her face was pale except for two bright spots of red on her cheeks, and her eyes looked hollow, shocked. This was what betrayal looked like, she realized. This was what it meant to discover that the person you trusted most in the world had been systematically lying to you for years. Sarah had always prided herself on being intuitive, on being able to read people and situations with clarity. It was part of what made her successful in marketing, the ability to understand what people wanted, what motivated them, what fears and desires drove their decisions. But she had been completely blind when it came to her own husband, completely unable to see the man behind the mask he wore for her benefit. She thought about the small moments that might have been clues if she had been paying attention. The way David always kept his phone face down during dinner, the way he had suddenly become interested in working out at a gym across town instead of the one near their house, the way he had started buying her more expensive gifts after trips away, jewelry, flowers, elaborate date nights that had felt romantic at the time, but now seemed like attempts to assuage guilt. Had Melissa been at the office Christmas party last year? Sarah tried to remember the faces in the crowd, the women she had been introduced to briefly before moving on to other conversations. Had she met her husband's mistress and not known it? Had she shaken hands with the woman who was carrying David's child while Sarah was still tracking her ovulation and taking prenatal vitamins in hopeful preparation? The thought made her stomach churn, and she rushed to the small hotel bathroom, thinking she might be sick. But nothing came up except the bitter taste of betrayal and the sound of her own ragged breathing.
Sarah splashed cold water on her face and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. "What now?" she asked her reflection, but the woman looking back at her had no answers, only the same shell-shocked expression that had been there all morning. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from David. She stared at his contact photo, the two of them at Niagara Falls on their 5th anniversary, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something she couldn't remember now. She had loved that photo, had loved the way they looked together, the way their happiness seemed to radiate from the screen. She had never imagined that by the time that photo was taken, David was already cheating, already breaking the promises he had made to her. She declined the call and immediately blocked David's number. She wasn't ready to hear his voice, his explanations, his attempts to minimize what he had done. She needed time to think,
to process, to figure out who she was. Now that everything she thought she knew about her life had been revealed as fiction. The adoption papers were still spread across the hotel bed, and Sarah forced herself to read through them more carefully. Isabella Rose Thompson, born October 2nd, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. The baby was barely 3 weeks old. Sarah calculated backwards. Conception would have been in early January, right around the time of David's office party. The timing aligned perfectly with his confession about Melissa being just one mistake, though Sarah now understood that even that was probably a lie. The custody arrangement was comprehensive. David was seeking full parental rights with Melissa retaining visitation. There were provisions for child support, for medical decisions, for education. This wasn't a casual fling that had resulted in an unwanted pregnancy. This was a man preparing to be a father, making legal and financial commitments to a child, building a parallel life that his wife knew nothing about. Sarah wondered if David had planned to tell her eventually, or if he had imagined he could somehow maintain both relationships indefinitely. Did he think she would be so desperate for a child that she would accept Isabella as their own, pretend that the circumstances of her conception didn't matter? Or had he been planning to leave Sarah all along, just waiting for the right moment to transition from his old life to his new one? The questions multiplied in her mind like a virus, each one leading to 3 more, each scenario more painful than the last. Sarah realized she might never know the truth about David's intentions, about the timeline of his deception, about how long she had been living as a fool in her own marriage. What she did know was that she couldn't go back to pretending. She couldn't sleep next to David and wake up every morning wondering what else he was hiding. She couldn't sit through dinner conversations about their future when he was already building a different future without her. She couldn't continue to be Sarah Chen Martinez when that identity was based on a relationship that had never been real. But she also didn't know how to be Sarah Chen again. 7 years was a long time. She had friends she had met through David, routines built around their marriage, dreams that had included him so completely that she couldn't imagine them any other way. Their house was in both their names. Their bank accounts were joint. Their lives were intertwined in 1,000 small ways that would have to be untangled one thread at a time. Sarah lay back on the hotel bed, staring at the textured ceiling, and tried to remember who she had been before David. What had made her happy? What had she wanted from life that didn't involve him? The memories felt distant and faded, like photographs left too long in the sun. She had wanted to travel more, she remembered. She had talked about taking a year off to backpack through Europe, to teach English in Asia, to see the world before settling down. David had been enthusiastic about travel too, but always in the context of their relationship. Romantic getaways, couples vacations, trips that reinforced their partnership, rather than expanding her individual horizons. She had also wanted to write. Before David, before marriage, before the comfortable routine of their shared life, Sarah had kept journals, had started a blog, had dreamed of writing something meaningful someday. But marketing copy and campaign proposals had gradually replaced her creative writing, and the blog had been abandoned years ago, another casualty of becoming half of a couple.
Now, sitting in a hotel room with the fragments of her marriage scattered around her, Sarah felt the first stirring of something that wasn't pain or anger or betrayal. It was possibility. Terrifying, overwhelming possibility, but possibility nonetheless. She could go anywhere now. She could be anyone. The life she had been building with David was over, but that didn't mean her life was over. It meant she had to figure out how to build a new one, starting from scratch, starting from herself. Sarah pulled out her laptop again and opened a blank document. For the first time in years, she began to write. Not marketing copy, not professional correspondence, but the truth about this day, about this moment, about the woman she was discovering herself to be in the aftermath of betrayal. "My name is Maya Chen," she typed. "Today, I found out that my husband is adopting his girlfriend's baby. Today, I discovered that my marriage was a lie. Today, I started over."
3 days later, Sarah's temporary sanctuary at the Marriott felt more like a prison than a refuge. She had extended her stay twice, each conversation with the front desk clerk becoming more awkward as she tried to explain why she needed just a few more days without revealing that she was essentially homeless by choice. Her work clothes were hanging in the small closet, pressed by hotel housekeeping, creating the illusion of a business trip that had somehow extended indefinitely. Marcus had covered for her admirably, rescheduling meetings and handling urgent client calls with a kind of professional competence that made Sarah realize how much she had taken her normal life for granted. But she couldn't hide in room 412 forever, and the pretense was becoming harder to maintain with each passing day. Her phone, she had unblocked David's number the previous evening in a moment of weakness, showed 43 missed calls and twice as many text messages. The messages had evolved from desperate apologies to angry accusations to something that felt almost like bargaining. "Please come home so we can work this out. You're throwing away 7 years over one mistake. Sarah, you're being unreasonable. The baby doesn't change anything between us." That last message had made Sarah laugh out loud in the hotel elevator, a sound so bitter it had startled the businessman sharing the space with her. The baby doesn't change anything. As if fathering a child with another woman was as insignificant as forgetting to take out the trash. Sarah had finally responded with a single text. "I need space. Do not contact me for at least a week." David's reply had come within minutes. "A week? Sarah, we need to talk now. People are asking questions." People are asking questions. Not "I miss you" or "I'm sorry" or "how can I fix this?" but people are asking questions. Even in crisis, David's primary concern was managing appearances, controlling the narrative, protecting his reputation. Sarah realized she was probably one of those people David was worried about. Their friends, their coworkers, their neighbors who had known them as the stable, successful couple with the beautiful house and the bright future. She wondered what story David was telling to explain her absence, what version of events made him look like the victim rather than the architect of their destruction. On Thursday morning, Sarah forced herself to return to work. She had run out of reasonable excuses, and hiding indefinitely wasn't going to solve anything. The Bradley and Associate office felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, like returning to a place from a dream. Her corner office looked exactly as she had left it. Client files neatly stacked, her coffee mug still sitting on the desk with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom, the framed photo of her and David from their anniversary dinner still smiling at her from the bookshelf. She turned the photo face down and tried to focus on her computer screen, but the normal rhythm of work felt impossible. Every email seemed trivial, every client concern laughably minor compared to the wreckage of her personal life. How is she supposed to care about market research and brand positioning when her entire identity had been built on a lie? "Marcus," he knocked on her open door, his expression carefully neutral. "How are you feeling? Better?" "Much better, thank you."
Sarah said, the lie coming easily. "I appreciate you handling everything while I was out." Marcus nodded, but he caught him glancing at her left hand where her wedding ring still sat out of habit rather than sentiment. She had thought about taking it off a dozen times over the past 3 days, but hadn't been able to bring herself to do it. The ring felt like the last thread connecting her to the person she had been, and she wasn't ready to cut it yet. The Reynolds account wants to reschedule their presentation, and Jameson Industries called about the Q4 campaign launch.
Sarah nodded and tried to look interested, but the words felt like they were coming from underwater. She managed to get through the morning by focusing on small, concrete tasks, returning phone calls, reviewing contracts, approving revised copy. It was almost noon when her personal phone rang. Jenny's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah realized she had been avoiding her sister's calls just as studiously as she had been avoiding David's. Jenny didn't deserve to be shut out, but Sarah wasn't ready for the conversation she knew they needed to have. "Hi, Jen," Sarah answered, trying to inject some normalcy into her voice. "Sarah, thank God." Jenny's voice was tight with concern. "I've been worried sick. You said you'd call, and then you disappeared. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah said, automatically. "Just dealing with some things." "What things?" "You canceled your doctor's appointment, you've been impossible to reach, and when I called your office yesterday, Marcus said you were out sick, but he sounded weird about it. What's going on?" Sarah closed her office door and sank into her chair. She could see the question coming from miles away, could see the moment when she would have to choose between continuing to lie and admitting the truth about her marriage. "It's complicated," Sarah said. "Sarah, you're scaring me. Are you sick? Are you and David having problems? Did something happen with the fertility treatments?" The fertility treatments. Sarah had almost forgotten about the elaborate charade of hope she had been maintaining for 2 years while David was impregnating other women. The appointments, the medications, the careful tracking of her cycle, the monthly disappointments when her period arrived right on schedule. All of it pointless. All of it based on the assumption that David actually wanted to have children with her. "Sarah?" Jenny's voice had taken on the firm tone she used when she was preparing to drive to Boston and stage an intervention. "Talk to me." "David has been cheating on me. Multiple women, over years. One of them had his baby, and he's adopting the child without telling me. I found the paperwork Monday morning." Silence stretched across the phone line, and Sarah could picture her sister processing the information, trying to reconcile this revelation with the marriage she thought she knew. "Oh, honey," Jenny finally said, her voice soft with sympathy and something that sounded like relief. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Where are you? Are you at home?" "I'm at a hotel downtown. I couldn't stay in the house." "Of course you couldn't. Have you talked to a lawyer?" A lawyer. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow, making the situation real in a way it hadn't been before. Divorce lawyers, asset division, custody arrangements, though thankfully that particular nightmare wouldn't apply to her since the child in question wasn't hers. "Not yet," Sarah said. "I've been trying to process everything first." "Sarah, you need legal representation, like yesterday, especially if he's making major financial decisions without consulting you. The adoption alone probably involves significant legal and financial commitments." Sarah hadn't thought about the financial implications. Were their joint assets being used to support David's new child? Had he been paying for medical expenses, legal fees, preparations for Isabella without Sarah's knowledge? The betrayal suddenly had a whole new dimension, not just emotional and physical, but financial too.
I don't even know where to start, Sarah admitted. I've never had to think about divorce lawyers. I know someone, Jenny said immediately. Remember my friend Carol from college? She's a family law attorney in Boston now. She handled her own divorce last year, and she's tough but fair. Let me call her. I don't know if I'm ready for that step yet, Sarah said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew she was being naive.
David was clearly several steps ahead of her in planning his new life. She needed to catch up. Sarah, listen to me. Jenny's voice took on the protective tone that Sarah remembered from childhood, when her older sister had defended her against playground bullies and mean teachers. David has been planning this for months, maybe years. He's been making decisions that affect your financial future, your legal standing, your entire life. And he's been doing it in secret. You can't afford to be passive here. Sarah knew Jenny was right, but the thought of calling divorce attorneys made everything feel permanent in a way she wasn't prepared for. As long as she was just hiding in a hotel room, she could pretend this was temporary, that maybe somehow they could work through this catastrophic betrayal. But once lawyers got involved, once papers were filed, there would be no going back to the life she had known. "What if I'm making a mistake?" Sarah asked quietly. "What if I'm throwing away something good over what?" Jenny's voice was sharp now. "Over your husband cheating on you with multiple women over multiple years and fathering a child with one of them? Sarah, that's not something. That's everything. That's the foundation of your marriage being completely rotten." Sarah knew her sister was right, but the fear of starting over felt overwhelming. At 32, she was supposed to have her life figured out. She was supposed to be planning nurseries and family vacations, not hotel stays and divorce attorneys. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "I don't know how to be alone. I haven't been alone in 8 years. "You're not alone," Jenny said firmly. "You have family, you have friends, you have a career you built yourself. And honey, you've been emotionally alone in your marriage for years. You just didn't know it. At least now you can start building something real." After hanging up with Jenny, Sarah sat in her office staring at the face-down photo frame, thinking about the woman she had been before David. That Sarah had been independent, ambitious, unafraid of challenges. She had moved to Boston knowing no one, had built her career from entry-level positions, and had created a life that was entirely her own. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that woman existed. Her desk phone rang, jarring her from her thoughts. "Sarah Chen Martinez?" "Sarah, it's Rebecca from HR. Could you come down to my office when you have a moment? There's something we need to discuss." Sarah's stomach dropped. HR conversations were never good news, and given the chaos of her personal life, she couldn't imagine what professional crisis might be waiting for her. Rebecca Martinez, no relation to David despite the shared surname, was in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that made even senior executives squirm. She had been with Bradley and Associates for 15 years and had a reputation for handling sensitive situations with discretion and fairness. "Please, sit down." Rebecca closed her office door behind Sarah. "How are you doing? Marcus mentioned you were dealing with a family emergency." "I'm managing, thank you," Sarah said carefully. Rebecca nodded and consulted a file on her desk. "Sarah, I need to ask you about some unusual activity on your corporate credit card. There were several charges over the past 6 months that don't align with your typical business expenses, and accounting flagged them for review." Sarah's blood went cold. What kind of charges? Rebecca turned her computer screen toward Sarah, showing a detailed expense report. Sarah scanned the entries, her confusion growing with each line item. Medical expenses at Boston Women's Health Services. Legal fees paid to Morrison and Associates Family Law. A charge for $2,847 to something called New Beginnings Adoption Services. "I didn't make any of these charges," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The card is issued in your name," Rebecca said gently, "but we know identity theft and fraud can happen. If someone has been using your card without authorization, we'll need to file a police report and work with the credit card company to reverse the charges." Sarah stared at the screen, her mind racing. The charges were too specific, too targeted to be random fraud. Medical expenses related to pregnancy and childbirth, legal fees for family law services, adoption agency costs. This wasn't identity theft. This was David using her corporate credit card to pay for his affair and its consequences.
I need to make some calls, Sarah said, her voice shaking with a combination of fury and humiliation. Can I get copies of these statements? Of course, Rebecca said, her expression sympathetic. Sarah, whatever's going on, we're here to support you. You're a valued member of our team, and we want to help however we can. Sarah nodded numbly and took the printed statements, her hands trembling as she tried to process this new level of betrayal. Not only had David been cheating and lying for years, he had been stealing from her professionally, using her corporate credit card to fund his double life. Every charge represented another violation of her trust, another way he had put her career and reputation at risk. She walked back to her office in a daze, the expense reports feeling like evidence in a criminal case rather than routine business documents. David had used her name, her credit, her professional standing to pay for his girlfriend's pregnancy and his baby's adoption. Sarah wondered if her colleagues knew, if anyone in accounting had noticed the unusual charges and connected them to her personal life. Her phone was ringing when she reached her desk. David's number. This time, she answered. What the hell is wrong with you? Sarah's voice was low and controlled, but the fury underneath was unmistakable. Sarah, thank God, I've been trying to reach you for days. We need to talk. You used my corporate credit card. You used my name and my professional reputation to pay for your girlfriend's pregnancy and your baby's adoption. Do you have any idea what you've done? Silence on the other end of the line. Sarah, I can explain how you committed fraud using my identity, explain how you put my job at risk to cover up your affair, explain how you made me an unwilling participant in funding your betrayal. It was temporary, David said, his voice taking on the defensive tone she had heard more often lately. I was going to pay it back before anyone noticed. It was just a cash flow issue.
A cash flow issue? Sarah's voice rose, and she forced herself to lower it, remembering she was at work. David, you stole from me. You stole from my company. You used my credit to pay for another woman's medical bills and your child's legal fees. This isn't a cash flow issue. This is criminal. Don't be dramatic, David said, and Sarah could picture him running his hands through his hair, the gesture that had once seemed endearing and now looked like manipulation. It's not like I was buying drugs or gambling. I was taking care of my responsibilities. Your responsibilities? Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. What about your responsibilities to me? What about your responsibility to be honest with your wife? What about your responsibility not to commit fraud? Sarah, please, let's meet somewhere and talk about this like adults. You're blowing this out of proportion. I'm hanging up now. And David, don't contact me again unless it's through a lawyer. You've done enough damage. She ended the call and immediately dialed Jenny's number. I need that lawyer's contact information, Sarah said when her sister answered, right now. What happened? Jenny asked, alarm clear in her voice. He used my corporate credit card to pay for his girlfriend's medical expenses and the adoption fees. I'm sitting here looking at thousands of dollars in charges I didn't make, and HR is asking questions about fraud. Jesus Christ, Jenny whispered. Sarah, this is beyond cheating. This is identity theft. This is war, Sarah finished, surprised by the steel in her own voice. And I'm done being the victim. Within an hour, Sarah had an appointment scheduled with Carol Jennings, ESQ, for the following morning. She had also contacted the credit card company to report fraudulent charges and spoken with Rebecca about filing a formal complaint with the police. As she gathered her things to leave the office early, something she had never done in 7 years with the company, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since finding the adoption papers: clarity. David had escalated beyond emotional betrayal into financial and professional destruction. He had forced her hand, made it impossible for her to remain passive or hope for reconciliation. For the first time since Monday morning, Sarah Chen Martinez knew exactly what she needed to do. She needed to fight back. That evening, Sarah sat in her hotel room with her laptop open, documenting everything she could remember about David's behavior over the past year.
The late nights, the unexplained absences, the changes in their intimacy, and the phone calls he took in private. She was building a case, creating a timeline, preparing for the battle she hadn't chosen but could no longer avoid. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Melissa Thompson. We need to talk." Sarah stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "About what?" "About David. About what he's told you. About what he's told me. I think we've both been lied to." Sarah's finger hovered over the keyboard. Meeting with David's mistress felt like the last thing she wanted to do, but something in the woman's message suggested this conversation might be inevitable. "When and where?" Sarah typed. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., coffee shop on Newberry Street called The Daily Grind. I'll be wearing a red scarf."
Sarah confirmed the meeting and closed her phone, wondering what new revelations awaited her. She had thought the worst was over, that finding the adoption papers and discovering the financial fraud were the bottom of David's deception. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The Daily Grind was exactly the kind of place Sarah would have chosen for a clandestine meeting. Busy enough to provide anonymity, quiet enough for serious conversation, neutral enough that neither woman would feel at a disadvantage. Sarah arrived 10 minutes early and claimed a corner table with a clear view of the entrance, ordering a coffee she didn't want and trying to prepare herself for a conversation she couldn't have imagined a week ago. Melissa Thompson walked through the door at exactly 2 p.m., and Sarah's first thought was that she looked nothing like what she had expected. David's mistress wasn't the sultry, predatory woman Sarah had imagined during her sleepless nights at the hotel. Instead, she was petite and pale, with light brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had been sleeping as poorly as Sarah. The red scarf was unmistakable, and Melissa's gaze found Sarah immediately. They looked at each other across the coffee shop for a moment, two women connected by the same man's lies, before Melissa walked over and sat down without ceremony. "You're smaller than I expected," Melissa said, pulling off her scarf and folding it carefully in her lap. "David always made you sound so intimidating." "Intimidating?" Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "What did he tell you about me?" Melissa signaled the waitress for coffee before answering. "That you were controlling, demanding, that you had impossible expectations and made his life miserable." She paused, studying Sarah's face. "Looking at you now, I'm guessing that was all bullshit." Sarah felt like she was looking at herself through a funhouse mirror, a distorted reflection of her own experience. "What else did he tell you?" "That your marriage was over and everything but name, that you two had been living like roommates for years, that he was only staying because you threatened to destroy him financially if he left." Melissa's voice was matter-of-fact, but she could see pain flickering in her eyes. "He said you knew about us and didn't care because you were having your own affairs." The lies were so comprehensive, so carefully constructed, that Sarah felt dizzy trying to process them. David hadn't just been cheating, he had been creating an alternate reality where Sarah was the villain and he was the victim trapped in a loveless marriage. "None of that is true," Sarah said quietly. "We were trying to have a baby. I thought we were happy. I had no idea about any affairs, his or anyone else's." Melissa nodded slowly. "I figured as much when I saw the adoption papers." "You've seen them?" "David showed them to me last week. He was so excited, talking about how we could finally be a real family, how he was going to leave you and we could raise Isabella together." Melissa's voice cracked slightly. "I told him I wasn't interested in being anyone's backup plan." Sarah felt a stab of something that might have been sympathy for this woman who had also been manipulated by David's lies. "Is that why you contacted me?" "Partly." Melissa took a sip of her coffee, her hands shaking slightly. "But also because I think you deserve to know the truth about what's been happening. All of it." "All of it?" Melissa pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be text messages. "David didn't just tell me your marriage was over, he told me you two were getting divorced. He showed me papers, fake ones, I realize now, that made it look like the process was already underway. He said you were fighting over assets, that you were trying to claim half his income, even though you made plenty of your own." Sarah's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "He showed you fake divorce papers?"
Very convincing ones, complete with lawyer letterhead and everything. Melissa turned her phone toward Sarah, showing a series of text exchanges. Look at these messages from January through March. He was sending me updates about the divorce proceedings, talking about how vindictive you were being, how you were trying to destroy his reputation at work. Sarah read through the messages, each one more elaborate than the last. David had created an entire fictional narrative about their marriage ending, complete with details about custody battles that didn't exist and financial disputes that were pure fantasy. He had made Melissa believe that Sarah was the other woman, the obstacle to their happiness, rather than the wife being betrayed. "This is insane," Sarah whispered. "He was lying to both of us." "It gets worse," Melissa said, pulling up another set of messages. "After Isabella was born, David started talking about how you were threatening to expose our relationship to his boss, how you were trying to sabotage his career. He said that's why he needed to move quickly with the adoption paperwork, to protect Isabella from your revenge." Sarah read through the messages, each one more elaborate than the last. David had created an entire fictional narrative about their marriage ending, complete with details about custody battles that didn't exist and financial disputes that were pure fantasy. He had made Melissa believe that Sarah was the other woman, the obstacle to their happiness, rather than the wife being betrayed. "This is insane," Sarah whispered. "He was lying to both of us." "It gets worse," Melissa said, pulling up another set of messages. "After Isabella was born, David started talking about how you were threatening to expose our relationship to his boss, how you were trying to sabotage his career. He said that's why he needed to move quickly with the adoption paperwork, to protect Isabella from your revenge." Sarah felt the last pieces of her marriage crumbling as she read David's messages. He hadn't just been cheating. He had been systematically destroying her reputation with his mistress, creating a version of Sarah that was vindictive, manipulative, and cruel. Every conversation, every intimate moment of their marriage had been fodder for his lies to another woman. "How long?" Sarah asked. "How long were you together?" Melissa was quiet for a moment, clearly calculating. "Almost 2 years. We met at the office Christmas party in December 2022. He pursued me pretty aggressively, said he'd been thinking about me for months but hadn't known how to approach me because of his complicated situation at home. 2 years. Sarah tried to map that timeline against her own memories. December 2022 was when she and David had started seriously trying to conceive. She had been taking prenatal vitamins, tracking her cycle, reading pregnancy books. David had seemed supportive, even excited about starting a family, all while he was beginning an affair that would last 2 years and produce the child Sarah desperately wanted. "The fertility treatments," Sarah said, more to herself than to Melissa. "We've been seeing a specialist, taking tests, trying different medications, adjusting timing. We thought we just needed medical help to conceive." I laughed bitterly. "Meanwhile, he was having no trouble at all getting pregnant with you." "Sarah, I am so sorry," Melissa said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "I had no idea. David told me you two had decided years ago that you didn't want children, that it was one of the major incompatibilities that led to your marriage falling apart." Another lie, another careful piece of the elaborate fiction David had constructed. I wonder how many hours he had spent crafting these stories, keeping the timeline straight, making sure his two lives never intersected in ways that would expose his deception. "When did you realize he was lying?" Sarah asked. "Last week, when he showed me the adoption papers and started talking about our future together. Something felt off about the way he described your reaction to the divorce. He said you had accepted it calmly, that you were even relieved to be done with the marriage. But if that were true, why would you be fighting so hard about the financial settlement?" She paused. "And then I realized I had never actually seen you. In 2 years of dating a married man, I had never once encountered his wife. Not at work events, not around town, nowhere. It seemed impossible unless he was lying about everything," Sarah finished. I started asking more questions, and his answers stopped making sense. The timeline didn't add up. The legal details seemed sketchy. And when I pushed him for proof that the divorce was real, he got angry in a way that made me suspicious. Sarah felt a grudging respect for Melissa's investigative instincts. So you decided to find me. I looked you up on social media, your Instagram, your LinkedIn, your company website. Nothing about your online presence suggested a woman going through a bitter divorce. You looked happy. You looked... Melissa struggled for the right word. You looked like a woman who thought she was in a good marriage. Sarah remembered her social media posts from the past few months. Anniversary dinner photos, weekend trip pictures, casual shots of her and David looking like the happy couple she had believed they were. The cognitive dissonance must have been striking for someone who had been told she was a vindictive ex-wife. "I'm sorry," Melissa said suddenly. "I know that's inadequate, but I'm sorry. If I had known the truth about your marriage, about the fertility treatments, about any of it, I never would have—" "You don't need to apologize to me," Sarah said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "You were lied to just as much as I was. David is the one who owes apologies, and I'm not sure there are enough words in any language to cover what he's done." They sat in silence for a moment, two women trying to process the scope of one man's deception. Sarah found herself studying Melissa's face, looking for signs of the femme fatale she had imagined, but finding instead a young woman who looked as bewildered and hurt as Sarah felt. "What are you going to do? About the marriage, I mean." "I'm filing for divorce. I met with a lawyer this morning. Between the infidelity, the financial fraud, and the fake documents, I apparently have what she called an embarrassment of riches when it comes to grounds for dissolution." Melissa nodded. "And Isabella?" The question hung in the air between them. Isabella Rose Thompson, the innocent child at the center of this mess, the baby who would grow up as a living reminder of her father's capacity for elaborate deception. "That's between you and David," Sarah said. "I have no legal standing when it comes to his daughter, and frankly, I don't want any." "But Melissa," Sarah leaned forward, her voice intense, "you need to be very careful about letting David have unsupervised access to Isabella. If he can lie this comprehensively to two adult women for years, what's he going to tell her as she grows up?" Melissa's face went pale. "I hadn't thought about that." "You also need to get your own lawyer," Sarah continued. "Don't rely on David's version of what the custody arrangements should be. Don't trust his interpretation of your rights or his responsibilities. Get independent legal advice." "I can't afford—" "You can't afford not to," Sarah said firmly. "David has shown that he's willing to commit fraud to get what he wants. He used my credit cards to pay for expenses related to your pregnancy and Isabella's adoption. If he'll steal from his wife, what makes you think he won't manipulate the legal system to get favorable custody terms?" Melissa was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the implications of everything they had discussed. "Can I ask you something?" "Were you happy?" Melissa asked. "In your marriage, before you knew about all this, were you actually happy?" Sarah considered the question carefully. A week ago, she would have answered without hesitation that yes, she had been happy. She thought she was living the life she wanted with the man she loved. But now, looking back with clear eyes, she could see cracks that had been there all along.
"I thought I was," Sarah said slowly. "But I think I was happy with the idea of my marriage rather than the reality of it. I was happy with the version of David that he showed me, not the person he actually was. And I think I made myself smaller to fit into his vision of what a wife should be." "Smaller how?" "I stopped traveling alone. I gave up hobbies that didn't include him. I made career decisions based on what would be good for our family rather than what I actually wanted." Sarah paused, realizing she was articulating thoughts that had been forming unconsciously for days. "I became Sarah the wife instead of Sarah the person. And I think that made it easier for David to lie to me, because he wasn't really lying to a fully realized person. He was lying to the character he had helped me create. Melissa nodded slowly. He told me you were controlling, but now I wonder if he said that because you had stopped challenging him about anything important. It probably felt like control to him when his wife was an actual person with opinions and boundaries. The insight hit Sarah like a physical blow. How much of David's resentment toward her had been based on her refusing to be the perfectly accommodating wife he seemed to expect? How many of his lies had been justified in his own mind as necessary to maintain the illusion of their perfect marriage? "I have to ask," Sarah said. "Do you love him?" Melissa was quiet for so long that Sarah thought she might not answer. "I thought I did. But I think I love the version of David who was trapped in an unhappy marriage, who was trying to do the right thing despite impossible circumstances. I loved the idea of being the woman who saved him from his misery." She looked up at Sarah with sad, clear eyes. "I don't think I ever knew the real David any more than you did." "And now?" "Now I'm terrified," Melissa admitted. "I have a 3-week-old baby whose father is apparently a sociopath. I'm 26 years old, I live in a studio apartment, and I make $38,000 a year as a junior accountant. The adoption paperwork gives David significant parental rights, including the ability to make medical and educational decisions for Isabella. What if he decides he wants full custody? What if he uses his superior financial resources to take her away from me?" Sarah felt a chill as she realized the full implications of David's legal maneuvering. He had positioned himself not just as Isabella's father, but as someone with substantial legal rights over her future. And if he was willing to commit fraud and identity theft to get what he wanted, he was certainly capable of using the legal system to manipulate custody arrangements. "You need to document everything," Sarah said urgently. "Every lie he told you, every fake document he showed you, every conversation where he misrepresented his marriage or his intentions. You need to create a paper trail that shows his pattern of deception." "Will you help me?" Melissa asked. "Will you testify about what he did to you if it comes to a custody battle?" Sarah looked at this young woman, barely out of college, caring for an infant, facing the prospect of a legal battle with a man who had proven himself capable of extraordinary manipulation, and felt something shift inside her chest. "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "I'll help you. We were both victims of David's lies, and we both deserve better. Isabella deserves better." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you had decided to hate me." "I don't hate you," Sarah said, surprised by how true it was. "I hate what David did to both of us. I hate that he put us in a position where we had to hurt each other without knowing it. But I don't hate you." They exchanged phone numbers before leaving the coffee shop. Two women united by betrayal and determined to prevent further damage. As Sarah walked back to her hotel, she felt something she hadn't experienced since finding the adoption papers: purpose. David had counted on his two lives never intersecting, on Sarah and Melissa never comparing notes about his lies. He had underestimated both women's intelligence and resilience. Now they would work together to ensure that his capacity for deception was fully exposed, not just for their own protection, but for Isabella's future safety. Sarah Chen Martinez was done being a victim. It was time to be a fighter. Sarah Martinez thought she knew her life. Married for 8 years to David, a successful consultant, she believed she was living the American dream in their suburban Boston home. They had been trying to conceive for over a year, undergoing fertility treatments together, planning their future family with hope and determination. But on one ordinary morning, everything shattered when a manila envelope fell from David's briefcase, spilling adoption papers across their kitchen floor. Papers that revealed David had fathered a child with another woman, a woman named Melissa Thompson, and was pursuing legal adoption rights. In that moment, Sarah's entire reality crumbled. The man she had shared a bed with,
planned a future with and trusted completely had been living a double life so elaborate and systematic that it defied comprehension. What Sarah discovered next was beyond her worst nightmares. David hadn't just had an affair. He had constructed an entirely fictional version of reality for both women in his life. To Melissa, he presented himself as a divorced man whose vindictive ex-wife was making his life difficult. He had even created fake legal documents to support this story, showing Melissa falsified divorce papers and custody agreements. For 18 months, while Sarah underwent painful fertility treatments and medications, David was simultaneously supporting Melissa through her pregnancy and the birth of their daughter, Isabella. He used Sarah's corporate credit card to pay for Melissa's medical expenses and legal fees, over $12,000 in unauthorized charges that put Sarah's professional reputation at risk. The systematic nature of David's deception was staggering. He maintained separate phones, email accounts, and social media profiles. He told elaborate lies about Sarah to Melissa, painting her as controlling and vindictive, while simultaneously playing the role of devoted husband at home. For nearly 2 years, he lived as two completely different people, never allowing his separate worlds to intersect. Rather than confronting David immediately, Sarah made a decision that would prove pivotal. She chose to investigate thoroughly before taking action. She hired a private investigator, consulted with divorce attorney Carol Jennings, and meticulously documented the extent of David's deception. When Sarah finally contacted Melissa directly, both women discovered they had been victims of the same elaborate manipulation. Melissa had been as deceived as Sarah, believing David was divorced, trusting in the fake documents he had shown her, never suspecting that the man she loved was living a completely different life with his actual wife. This phone call between the two women marked the beginning of an unlikely alliance that would prove crucial in exposing David's systematic fraud and protecting baby Isabella from further manipulation. The divorce proceedings revealed the full scope of David's financial and emotional crimes. He had committed fraud, identity theft, and systematic abuse through his elaborate deceptions. Carol Jennings, Sarah's attorney, built a case that documented not just the adultery, but the calculated nature of David's manipulation of multiple women.
During the legal proceedings, David's lawyer attempted to portray the situation as simple errors in judgment. But the evidence painted a picture of deliberate, systematic deception spanning years. David had created false legal documents, manipulated women during vulnerable periods of their lives, and used his wife's financial resources to fund his betrayal. The custody battle between David and Melissa became another arena where Sarah's testimony proved crucial. Her evidence of David's pattern of deception seriously undermined his case for parental rights, resulting in supervised visitation only and requirements for psychological evaluation and parenting classes. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Sarah had legally returned to her maiden name, Maya Chen, and moved into a small but entirely her own apartment in Cambridge. For the first time in almost a decade, she was living as a fully autonomous adult, making every decision based on her own preferences rather than compromising with a partner. The healing process was neither quick nor linear. Sarah underwent extensive therapy to untangle the psychological damage of systematic deception. She had to learn to trust her instincts again, to recognize that her feelings and perceptions were valid, and to understand how she had been manipulated into doubting her own judgment. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah began writing. What started as a therapeutic exercise evolved into a memoir about her experience. Her literary agent recognized the universal appeal of the story, not just as a tale of betrayal, but as a roadmap for recognizing manipulation and rebuilding after systematic deception. The relationship between Sarah and Melissa evolved into something neither woman could have anticipated. United in their determination to protect Isabella from David's continued manipulation,
They became allies and eventually close friends. Sarah helped Melissa find better housing and job opportunities, becoming an unofficial godmother to Isabella. This alliance infuriated David, who accused Sarah of turning his daughter against him. But the court system saw it differently, recognizing Sarah's support for Isabella, despite having no legal obligation, as evidence of remarkable character, while David's anger revealed a disturbing need to control the narrative even after his deceptions had been exposed. When Melissa later married Alex, a kind and patient teacher who became Isabella's adoptive father, Sarah was there to celebrate the family that had been built on truth and mutual support, rather than lies and manipulation. Sarah's memoir, The Other Wife, a memoir of deception and recovery, was published to meaningful success. More importantly, it connected her with hundreds of readers who had recognized elements of their own relationships in her story. Women wrote to thank her for helping them trust their instincts, for giving them permission to believe what they already knew was true about their own situations. One letter that particularly moved Sarah came from a woman in Oregon who wrote, "I read your book and realized my husband had been having an affair for 3 years, not because the details were the same, but because you taught me to trust my instincts instead of his explanations. I found evidence within a week of finishing your book." These responses led to speaking opportunities at universities and women's organizations. Sarah discovered she loved public speaking, not because she enjoyed reliving trauma, but because she could see the moment when women in her audiences realized they weren't crazy, weren't oversensitive, weren't imagining things. Their instincts were valid, their feelings mattered, their experiences were real.
3 years after their divorce, Detective Maria Santos called Sarah with news that was shocking, but in retrospect, entirely predictable. David had been arrested on charges of financial fraud involving multiple victims. After their divorce, he hadn't reformed. He had simply found new targets. David was running investment scams targeting divorced women he met through online dating sites, promising high returns on fake opportunities, taking their money, and disappearing when victims tried to contact him using falsified identification documents. At least 12 women had been identified as victims, with financial losses ranging from $5,000 to $80,000. Sarah testified at David's criminal trial, helping establish his pattern of deception for the jury. Her 3 hours of testimony was calm, factual, and devastating, describing the systematic nature of his manipulation and the elaborate infrastructure he created to support his lies. David was convicted on 11 counts of fraud and sentenced to 6 years in prison. At his sentencing hearing, Sarah provided a victim impact statement that captured the true scope of the damage he caused. David Martinez will serve his sentence and be released. When that happens, he will likely resume targeting vulnerable women because that's who he is. Sarah's experience and advocacy work led her to pursue a PhD in criminology with a focus on relationship-based fraud. She became Dr. Maya Chen and was hired as an assistant professor at Boston University, where she established the Center for Digital Deception Research. Her academic work focused on understanding how technology enables modern romance fraud and developing prevention strategies. The center received major federal grants to study the long-term psychological impacts of romance fraud on survivors, becoming the first comprehensive research initiative of its kind. Sarah's prevention curriculum was implemented in multiple states, reaching over 50,000 participants and demonstrating that early intervention education could reduce victimization rates by up to 40%. Her work helped law enforcement agencies understand the psychology of relationship-based financial crimes and develop more effective prosecution strategies. Isabella grew up understanding that the man who had contributed to her genetic makeup was not her father in any meaningful sense. Her father was Alex, who had chosen to love and support her from the time she was a toddler.
She also understood that Aunt Sarah was the woman who had helped protect her and her mother during a dangerous time in their lives. Remarkably, Isabella decided to follow in Sarah's footsteps, planning to study psychology in college with the goal of helping people who had been hurt by manipulative relationships. This choice represented the most meaningful legacy Sarah could have hoped for. The next generation choosing to turn potential trauma into protective action for others. 15 years after that devastating morning with the adoption papers, Dr. Maya Chen stood at the podium of the United Nations headquarters addressing the Global Summit on Digital Crimes Against Women. Her work had expanded internationally, with the Center for Digital Deception Research operating branches in 12 countries and her prevention curriculum translated into 23 languages. Sarah's books had helped thousands of people recognize and escape manipulative relationships. Her testimony had put dozens of predators in prison, protecting countless potential future victims. Her research had influenced policy changes and law enforcement protocols around the world. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that it was possible to transform trauma into triumph, to turn the worst betrayal imaginable into a force for protecting others from similar harm. Sarah's story offers profound insights into the nature of deception, recovery, and resilience. Trust your instincts. Throughout her marriage to David, Sarah had moments of unease, times when something felt off. She had learned to dismiss these feelings, to accept David's explanations rather than trusting her own perceptions. Recovery meant learning to honor those instincts again. Healthy relationships should make you more yourself. David had gradually shaped Sarah into a version of herself that served his needs, more compliant, less questioning, more focused on maintaining harmony than seeking truth. Healthy love should celebrate and support who you actually are. Recovery is about reclaiming your voice. The most damaging aspect of systematic deception isn't just the lies themselves, but the way they make victims doubt their own judgment and perception of reality. Healing meant Sarah learning to trust herself again. Purpose can emerge from pain. Sarah's devastation became the foundation for work that has protected thousands of other people from similar harm. This doesn't mean trauma is a gift, but that human resilience can transform even the worst experiences into sources of strength and service. Today, Sarah's influence extends far beyond her own recovery. The women she has helped recognize manipulation in their own relationships have gone on to protect their children, rebuild their lives, and often help other women in similar situations. Isabella has grown into a young woman committed to psychological healing and protection of vulnerable people. Melissa and Alex's marriage stands as an example of what partnership looks like when it's built on mutual respect and honest communication. Their family demonstrates that the most meaningful relationships are often the ones we choose and build rather than the ones we're born into.
The Center for Digital Deception Research continues to evolve, training law enforcement officers, developing new prevention strategies, and supporting survivors around the world. Sarah's work has influenced policy changes, legal procedures, and educational initiatives across multiple countries. Perhaps the most important message of Sarah's story is that even the most devastating betrayals don't have to define us. The discovery of David's deception felt like the end of Sarah's world, but it became the beginning of a life lived with greater authenticity, purpose, and impact than she had ever imagined possible. Sarah learned that happy endings aren't about finding the perfect relationship or erasing painful experiences. They're about becoming the author of your own life, about refusing to let someone else's lies define your truth, about turning your greatest wounds into your greatest strengths. Her journey from victim to survivor to advocate to global expert demonstrates the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit and the power of transforming personal pain into protection for others. If Sarah's story resonates with you, whether you've experienced similar betrayals, questioned your own instincts in relationships, or simply wondered how people rebuild after devastating discoveries, know that your journey matters too. Trust your instincts. Question explanations that don't feel right.
Remember that healthy love should make you feel more like yourself, not less. Seek support when you need it, and remember that even if your world feels like it's ending, it might actually be beginning. Sarah's story continues to unfold, continues to impact lives around the world, continues to prove that our worst experiences can become the foundation for our most meaningful contributions. Her voice, once silenced by deception and self doubt, now speaks for thousands of survivors who are finding their own path to truth, healing, and purpose. Thank you for listening to Sarah's remarkable journey from betrayal to triumph. Her story reminds us that resilience is possible, that truth matters, and that even our deepest wounds can become sources of strength and service to others. If Sarah's story has moved or inspired you, please consider subscribing to hear more stories of human resilience, transformation, and the extraordinary capacity for healing. Every subscription helps us continue sharing these important narratives that remind us of our shared humanity and infinite capacity for growth. Don't forget to subscribe, share with someone who might need to hear Sarah's message, and remember, your story matters too.